He forgave everyone, even those who didn't ask for forgiveness. He considered it kindness, and then he realized that kindness should not cost him his own self. I lived long enough to see kindness turn into currency in someone else's pocket. Forgiveness, they say, heals. A neat line, lovely to print on a wall, terrible to build a life on. Spent decades handing forgiveness out like a rabbi hands blessings on a busy holiday, without checking who actually deserved it. Wore it like a badge of honor. Thought it made me larger, braver, softer, noble even. Took years before realizing that constant forgiveness is just another name for self-erasure. Nobody warns you that forgiveness can become a habit you never question. Feels holy at first, pure, civilized, until you notice you've forgiven the same wound so many times it's no longer healing. You're just keeping it open for easy access. Pushed myself into belief that letting people off the hook meant I was above resentment. Turned out I wasn't above anything, just beneath everyone's expectations. Easier to forgive than to face the brutal truth. Some people don't want absolution. They want permission to repeat the crime. There is a moment in every life when patterns stop looking poetic and start looking dangerous. Mine came quietly. No fireworks, no drama, no revelation that arrives cinematic and loud. One morning I heard myself excusing someone before they even apologized. Pre-forgiveness, like giving out umbrellas for a rainstorm that never asked to be predicted. Gave them an exit before they admitted they entered the room with muddy boots. A sad kind of readiness. That day tasted bitter because for the first time I understood the trade, their comfort in exchange for my silence. Arguing with myself was exhausting. Invented explanations for others like bedtime stories. Built backstories, motives, inner wounds, invisible pain, anything to justify why they bent the truth, ignored boundaries, vanished when loyalty demanded presence. Left reality waiting outside like an uninvited guest. At some point, you notice how much emotional labor forgiveness really takes. Noble? Not at all. It was unpaid overtime for the heart, and I never once asked for a contract. Certain betrayals don't roar, they whisper. Their dangers in how reasonable they sound. You're strong enough to let it go. You understand me better than anyone. You're not like others who hold grudges. Compliments that double as traps. Hooks dipped in honey. Heard them so often I began to think forgiving meant graduating into a higher emotional class, above petty hurt, above boundaries, above self-protection. That belief didn't elevate me. It erased me smoothly, like a pencil rubbing out lines too gently for anyone to notice. Age brings clarity, but wisdom comes only when humiliation agrees to teach the lesson. The most expensive realizations are the ones labeled kindness. Nobody applauds when you finally stop forgiving the unforgivable. No audience, no witnesses, just a quiet internal collapse where one truth replaces 100 lies you previously nurtured. Real strength begins not in letting go, but in refusing to absorb damage you never deserved. Years have taught me this uncomfortable mathematics. Forgiveness without accountability is loyalty to the wrong narrative. Compassion without limits is self-betrayal wearing a friendly disguise. Understanding without boundaries is just surrender with soft lighting. Resentment isn't the villain people make it out to be. Resentment is memory trying to protect you when your heart keeps volunteering for injury. There is a line where forgiveness stops being grace and starts being self-abandonment. I crossed it so many times the border knew my footsteps. And the tragic part? Nobody forced me. I walked there proudly, believing sacrifice was synonymous with moral greatness. Believed it right up until the moment I realized something much harder to swallow. Not everyone you forgive wishes you well. Some are simply grateful you're easy to erase. And here's the truth most never say out loud, the one that stings more than betrayal itself. Some people don't want your forgiveness. They want your silence. But the deeper twist? That silence costs more than they'll ever pay back, unless you stop offering it. If you think you already understand where this goes, I promise you don't. What follows is the part no one prepares you for, the piece everyone skips, the one truth that changes the shape of your entire inner compass. Don't look away yet. The story only begins where forgiveness ends. The longest relationship in my life wasn't love or friendship. It was negotiation. A silent, constant bargaining where I exchanged pieces of myself for moments of temporary peace. Never noticed the process while it was happening. The slowest losses are invisible ones, like paint fading in sunlight, or a voice softening because it expects not to be heard. Pressure never arrived in dramatic force. It arrived like a suggestion, gentle, reasonable, almost affectionate. Requests wrapped in softness that made refusal feel hostile. Expectations presented as casual observations. Emotional debts disguised as moral obligations. Nobody announces the moment control starts. They just ask for something small, then smaller again, until the scale of surrender becomes your normal posture. Somewhere along the way, forgiveness stopped being a choice and turned into my reflex. Offense happened. I absorbed it. Disappointment landed. I internalized it. No pause. No examination. Apology became irrelevant because I supplied closure on both sides. I was the judge, the witness, and the one delivering the pardon, usually before the evidence was even presented. Stunning, really, how efficient self-erasure becomes when convenience applauds it. Rationality was the costume abuse liked to wear around me. Harsh moments framed as honesty. Neglect disguised as self-preservation. Absence labeled independence. Betrayal rumored to be growth. And I, determined to be enlightened, mistook pain for progress. Called it evolution. Labeled it maturity. Applauded it internally as if endurance itself carried moral superiority. What a brilliant illusion that was. People learn quickly who doesn't charge consequences. They don't need to be malicious. Opportunity is enough. Patterns repeat not because of evil, but because they work. I created a world where accountability felt rude, boundaries sounded dramatic, and disappointment was an inside job no one else needed to clock in for. Trained everyone around me to expect understanding, even when understanding drained more than rage ever could. One day, exhaustion stopped feeling psychological and began to feel structural, like the beams of a house quietly bending after years of extra weight no one acknowledged. That kind of tired doesn't heal with rest. Sleep doesn't negotiate with betrayal. Time doesn't repair what keeps happening. Insight arrived not like a lesson, but like a ledger, adding up the emotional expenses, noticing how few of them were mine, realizing the bill was never meant to be split evenly in the first place. Rebellion didn't roar, it sharpened. Clarity is a different kind of loud, the loud that doesn't need volume because it carries authority. Understood then that forgiveness had quietly mutated into avoidance, a tool to keep the peace, not cleanse the wound, a strategy to remain liked, not healed. A discomfort I mistook for moral excellence, polished so often it felt like virtue. History will never record the quiet cost of being the understanding one. There are no parades for the over-forgiver, no medals for enduring small betrayals, no documentaries for the ones who swallow the pebbles until their voice scratches from the inside. Pain that doesn't scream gets archived as if it never happened. Survival without protest looks like agreement to the outside world. The turning point never looks like a battle. It looks like arithmetic. Addition finally done with honesty, subtraction at last permitted. Recognition that saying, "it's fine," too many times doesn't make life gentle. It makes you disappear in installments. Realized I had forgiven so broadly, so generously, so automatically, that I had accidentally forgiven the very things that were slowly erasing the person doing the forgiving. A boundary delayed is not a boundary avoided. It simply accumulates interest. The debt doesn't vanish. It waits, quietly, patiently, until your silence becomes heavier than confrontation ever was. And here is the part that slices cleanest. I wasn't scared of losing people. I was terrified of being the villain in someone else's story. But the story was never theirs to narrate, and forgiveness was never meant to be confession on behalf of the unrepentant. The next truth gets sharper. Stay awake for it. If this monologue resonated with you, then you know how painful it is to forgive those who haven't even apologized. Subscribe to the channel if you're also looking not for advice, but for the truth, spoken quietly but honestly. And write in the comments, who have you forgiven and regretted it? I read every story, because sometimes one stranger's confession is more important than 1,000 books. They never said it out loud, but the message was always clear. Be easy to forgive, and people will stay. Be soft enough to hurt, but silent enough to manage it privately. That's what they reward. Not honesty, not strength, manageability. I used to think choosing peace meant avoiding conflict, that if I kept my voice low, if I smiled through the bruise, if I rationalized one more disappointment, I was being wise. That restraint was a higher path. No one told me that this so-called wisdom was just fear in a suit, the fear of being disliked, of being labeled difficult, of losing people who only stayed because I made it comfortable to misuse me. Forgiveness, in its purest form, is supposed to be a release, a moment of truth, a full breath, a reset. But what I practiced wasn't forgiveness. It was performance, a daily role I played to maintain relationships that should have ended long ago. I wasn't forgiving people. I was doing damage control for their egos, protecting them from the mirror while cutting pieces from my reflection. They called me kind, generous, compassionate, beautiful words that felt like medals until I realized they were shackles. Every time I swallowed my anger, smiled at manipulation, or bent a little further to prove I wasn't like the rest, I thought I was rising above. In reality, I was digging my own absence into every room I walked into. At some point, you stop forgiving because you're good. You start forgiving because you're tired. Too tired to explain, too tired to argue, too tired to make someone understand a type of pain they have no intention of acknowledging. That's when forgiveness turns toxic, when it starts functioning like anesthesia. You're still being cut, but now you feel nothing. The danger isn't in pain. It's in numbness that pretends to be maturity. No one warned me that forgiveness without change becomes complicity. That offering grace to someone who weaponizes it is like watering a plant that strangles your house. I let too many people believe their apology was enough to rewrite history, that a few words could clean the blood from the floor without anyone lifting a mop. They say, but isn't everyone human? Doesn't everyone deserve a second chance? Yes, they do. But not a seventh, not an 18th, not infinity, not at the cost of your stability. Not when their learning curve is an endless loop and you're the collateral damage of their personal growth. Real forgiveness, I've learned, comes with requirements. It demands accountability, change, boundaries, and healing for both people, not just one. Without those pieces, forgiveness is just another word for self-abandonment. You want to know what changed me? It wasn't a grand betrayal, not some dramatic finale. It was the tiny, quiet moment when I finally heard my own voice after silencing it for so long. It didn't scream, it didn't accuse, it just whispered, "Enough." That whisper had more truth in it than all the apologies I'd ever received combined. And here's the cruelest part of the overforgiver's journey. The more you let things go, the less people believe you were ever hurt at all. Your silence becomes their license. Your grace becomes their excuse. They walk away intact. You walk away invisible. That's when it hits. You didn't forgive them. You forgot yourself. Piece by piece, layer by layer, until even you couldn't remember who you were before you became the better person. But don't make the mistake I made. Don't think the only way to prove your strength is to carry pain quietly. There is power in drawing a line. There is clarity in closing a door. There is self-respect in saying, "I see what you did, and I choose me this time." Forgiveness is not weakness, but forgiving the wrong people for the wrong reasons will make you disappear and call it peace. The next truth? It's the one no one wants to hear, the one that separates healing from fantasy. And once you hear it, you won't be able to go back. They say you should forgive for your own peace, that it's not about them, it's about you. I understand the logic. I understand the appeal. But here's what they don't tell you. Some peace costs too much. Some silence feels like swallowing glass and smiling through it. I forgave people who never even paused to ask why they hurt me. They didn't lose sleep. I did. They moved on. I sat up in the middle of the night, rewatching conversations, rehearsing alternate versions where I stood up for myself, versions where I didn't stay quiet just to keep the connection alive. What a terrible deal that was, preserving relationships at the expense of my own self-worth. And for what? To be seen as gracious? To maintain a fragile bond built on my restraint and their comfort? Let me say this clearly. There is nothing noble about making excuses for someone who has no intention of changing. There is nothing spiritual about tolerating patterns that tear you apart in the name of emotional maturity. And there is no redemption in forgiving what is still happening. I lived years inside that delusion. The idea that if I gave people room, they'd grow. That if I let them cross my lines with a kind smile, they'd learn not to do it again. But behavior doesn't change because you endure it. It changes when it costs something. The moment I realized that, something in me snapped, but not in a violent way. It was more like a quiet reassembly, a new alignment, a recognition that I'd been confusing endurance with integrity. They are not the same. One keeps you upright, the other wears you down. You can't build self-respect on a foundation of repeated forgiveness. You can't find peace in relationships where your pain is optional background noise. You can't feel whole while constantly offering pieces of yourself to people who only show up when they need something soft to land on. I used to think drawing boundaries was cruel. Now I see that not having any is a slow kind of suicide. Not physical, but spiritual, emotional. You don't disappear all at once. You vanish in small increments, one ignored feeling, one overlooked offense, one it's okay when it's not, one second chance too many. Forgiveness in the wrong direction makes you invisible, but not to them, to yourself. You stop recognizing your own reflection because it's been shaped by what others needed from you. A version of you that can't say no, that never leaves, that never demands, that stays, even when staying costs everything. And here's the bitter twist. Some people will only love you as long as you keep forgiving them. The second you ask for accountability, the warmth disappears. The moment you say, "That hurt me," they shift the blame. Suddenly, you're dramatic, overreacting, sensitive. So I learned this. The wrong people don't need forgiveness. They need distance. Letting go doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means refusal, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. You cannot heal in the same place that wounded you, no matter how polite your forgiveness sounds. And don't let anyone use your compassion against you. Don't let them recast your empathy as weakness. Don't fall for the myth that real love is unconditional if the condition is your silence. You are allowed to outgrow the version of you who kept saying, "It's fine," just to hold on to people who never once asked if you were okay. You are allowed to forgive yourself for letting it go on too long, and you are allowed to stop forgiving what is breaking you. Here's the hardest part, the part that makes people flinch. Forgiveness without boundaries doesn't heal you. It trains you to accept neglect. And healing? Healing begins where tolerance ends. You think that's the hardest truth? It's not. The one that's coming, that's the one you've been avoiding your whole life. At some point, you stop asking, "Why did they do this to me?" You start asking, "Why did I let it happen again?" That's the pivot. That's the moment everything shifts. Not because you want to carry the blame, but because you're finally ready to carry the truth. It's easier to believe people fooled you, that you just didn't see it coming, that you were too kind, too hopeful, too innocent. But if you've been through it more than once, it wasn't innocence. It was conditioning. Conditioning to tolerate the bare minimum, to romanticize crumbs, to interpret silence as mystery, to confuse emotional inconsistency with depth. You weren't blind. You were trained by patterns, by culture, by survival instincts, trained to believe that love is earned through self-sacrifice, that worth is proven through patience, that the high road is always the one where your voice doesn't matter. I know this because I did it, over and over again, and each time I called it forgiveness. Each time I convinced myself I was the bigger person. But bigger than what? Than honesty? Than self-respect? You know what I've learned about patterns. They don't break by accident. They break the moment you stop giving them somewhere to land. That's when the real pain comes, not from the other person, but from the realization that you were complicit in your own erasure, not guilty, but involved, present, nodding through the discomfort, smiling through the disrespect, silencing your own instincts because discomfort felt safer than confrontation. Here's a truth I wish someone had told me earlier. Forgiveness doesn't fix anything unless it's followed by change. Without that, it's just decoration. A nice story you tell yourself while your soul keeps limping. And the more beautiful your excuses sound, the more dangerous they become. Because now you're not just hurt. You're loyal to the very thing that's hurting you. It's easy to blame others. Harder to see the rituals you created to keep the illusion intact. Even harder to admit how often you betrayed yourself to keep someone else comfortable. The longer you live, the more you understand. Pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it's polite. Sometimes it shows up dressed as maturity. Sometimes it gets applauded because people admire your strength without realizing you're bleeding behind your smile. Forgiveness isn't always grace. Sometimes it's what people expect from you because they know you're too tired to fight. Sometimes it's a reflex you've mistaken for wisdom. And the cost? You start mistaking peace for the absence of noise instead of the presence of respect. You can't heal in spaces where your hurt is treated like an inconvenience. You can't grow around people who only love you when you're easy to love. And you can't be whole while constantly shrinking to fit someone else's comfort zone. I forgave so many times. I forgot what it felt like to say, "That's not okay." And when I finally said it, the people I forgave the most were the first to walk away, because they weren't there for me. They were there for the version of me who never asked for anything. That's when I understood something most people avoid their entire lives. Some people don't want your forgiveness. They want the version of you who never held them accountable. And if you keep forgiving that, you'll spend your entire life explaining why you're still not okay to people who never deserved access in the first place. The question isn't, do they deserve another chance? It's, do you deserve to keep being hurt by the same story? There's only one kind of forgiveness that truly liberates you, and it's the kind where you forgive yourself for not walking away sooner. But even that isn't the final truth. There's still one more piece, the part we avoid, the truth that doesn't just heal, it ends the game entirely. I used to think healing was a moment, a single event, a breakthrough, a revelation, something cinematic, where the music swells and the pain dissolves. That's the fantasy. But real healing is quieter than that. It's not loud. It's not poetic. It's not even satisfying at first. It feels like loss, and silence, and guilt for finally choosing yourself after years of being taught that self-abandonment was love. I don't regret forgiving people. I regret not realizing sooner what that forgiveness cost me. Time, energy, self-respect, my own voice. You want to know what finally ended the cycle? It wasn't cutting someone off. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was sitting in a room alone and admitting to myself, I'm tired of bleeding for people who never bring bandages. Not angry, not broken, just done. Done pretending I don't notice, done hoping they'll change, done writing off their behavior as they didn't mean it, done using forgiveness as a survival mechanism. Because sometimes what you call forgiveness is really just your fear of setting a boundary in disguise. And here's the hardest truth I've had to swallow. People don't change when you forgive them. They change when they're held accountable. They change when the cost of staying the same finally becomes too high. If you're always the one absorbing the impact, they never feel it. If you're always the one smoothing things over, they never learn what it means to lose access to you. And if they never lose you, they never value you. It took me decades to understand this. Forgiveness is not the goal. Peace is. But peace, real peace, doesn't come from handing out endless chances. It comes from alignment, from integrity, from waking up and knowing that today you didn't betray yourself for the comfort of anyone else. There's a version of you on the other side of that kind of peace. She's clear. She's steady. She's not angry. But she's also not available for manipulation anymore. She loves deeply, but not blindly. She gives second chances, but only once. And most of all, she never again says, "It's okay," when it's not. Letting go of the idea that forgiveness is always the answer will feel unnatural at first. You'll doubt yourself. You'll fear you become cold. You'll miss the comfort of old patterns. But eventually, you'll breathe fully for the first time in years, and you'll realize that inner peace was never about becoming softer for others. It was about becoming honest with yourself. I'm not here to tell you to hate anyone. That's not the point. The point is to stop betraying yourself in the name of grace, to stop handing out clean slates to people who have no intention of holding a pen, to stop confusing tolerance with healing, to stop calling it growth when it's just quiet endurance. Some people should be forgiven from a distance, without invitation back into your life, without reopening the doors they slammed behind them, without giving them another chance to prove they never deserved the first one. And above all, forgive yourself for not knowing what you know now. That version of you did her best. She believed the stories. She loved hard. She gave more than she should have. She stayed longer than was fair to her. She kept trying to fix what was never hers to repair. But now she's gone. And the woman who's left, she doesn't need to forgive everyone. She needs to protect the peace she paid for with years of quiet suffering. And this time, she will, in full, not because she's angry, but because she finally knows the difference between being kind and being used. Now she knows. Now she's not alone. Now she can be quiet and not afraid.